Yesterday, a white mother found herself at the center of a firestorm when she told off a black child after he attempted to steal items from her purse. To put it plainly, she called him the N-word. And when confronted by a TikToker who happened to be nearby, she doubled down. The video went viral, and within hours, Shiloh's home address, social security number, school, and family were leaked to the public. She had to pull her 2 children out of school and is going to have to relocate. To support this, she started a fundraiser that quickly raised over $250,000 and is on track for much more. Most of the comments are in support of her, what she did, and expressing their frustration with the decay of public behavior. Now, some are drawing the correlation to Karmelo Anthony. If we critiqued the funds raised on his behalf for terrible behavior, why are we turning around and rewarding her bad behavior? This episode is brought to you by our premier sponsors, Armored Republic and Reece Fund, as well as our Patreon members and our faithful donors. You can join our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries, or you can donate by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. So let's break this story down. We are so back. We are so back. X is just going crazy today. All the social media platforms. People have had enough. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not to justify some of the more vitriolic comments. Some of the comments I think are things that a Christian just simply cannot say, should not say. But people are furious, and I do understand the anger. To be completely honest, I find myself to be a bit angry as well. And I think there's a way. Anger is not inherently a sin, but in your anger, do not sin. And so what we do with our anger as Christians is vitally important. But it's also vitally important to be angry in the right measure for the right things at the right time. And all that ultimately, anger is all that stems from ultimately our loves, right? So if we have our loves properly ordered, St. Augustine talked about this, the order amoris and, the proper ordering of loves. If we love the right thing in the right measure at the right time, then we'll be angry by way of consequence for the right thing in the right measure at the right time, right? If you find yourself losing your mind and you're ready to kill someone because, you got cut off in traffic, right? Or, just a hypothetical example, because somebody asked you to get out of their seat and to go sit somewhere else, and you find yourself, like, I'm so angry, I'm going to stab someone in the heart and kill them, right? Well, that would be a overreaction, right? You're a little bit too angry in that situation, and what that ultimately reveals is that your loves are misordered. But if we have rightly ordered loves, that we love God first and foremost, but then beyond that, we love, our immediate family, our wives, our children. Then beyond that, we love our people. We love our local churches and fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, but then also our nation, which is supposed to be an extension of the family. Sadly, because of multiculturalism and 30 to 40 million immigrants just in the last 4 years, that becomes much more complicated than what I believe God intended. But if we have properly ordered loves, then it's not that we'll have no anger, but we'll have righteous anger. We'll have a right degree of anger for the right things at the right time. And so I wanted to just kick it off. We're going to have a special guest today joining us. We've got Dominic Trippy. He's joined our podcast before, and he's going to come because he has some breaking news on this particular story. And so we'll invite him here in just a moment. But first, I wanted to just frame it for the listener, because I think there's a lot of normies, who are well-meaning and love the Lord and are trying to, be faithful in their families and their local churches, but who just, frankly, just don't get it. And they don't understand what's happening. And so I'm going to do my best to humbly try to catch you up to speed. So I have a tweet that I want to pull up now. I'm going to have Nathan pull it up. This is something that I posted just a couple days ago. So this is a retweet responding to Britta, No Soup for Knowles. That's a reference to Michael Knowles. So this is a Daily Wire fan account. And you got to give her props. She has weathered the storm, no matter what Daily Wire does, she is a devoted fan account. And
top guy.
Top gal. Yeah, top gal. And it's impressive. I mean, Daily Wire can just be putting out some slop, and she is just right there defending it. Find you, fellas, if you're single, find you a woman who loves you the way that Britta loves the Daily Wire, and you'll be a happy man. All right, so here's the tweet. Let's put it back up. I said this. She said, in 2020, the woke left accused us of white supremacy. In 2025, the woke right accuses us of anti-white racism. Okay, so this is a very stupid tweet. This is absolute insanity. I mean, this is so dumb that I don't know. It's hard to even break it down. But this is the reason I'm doing it. This is where 80%, I would argue 80% of conservative, right? Your conservative, evangelical, Protestant, Christian people are. They're like, oh, well, I'm just anti-wokeness across the board. I don't like wokeness when it's on the left, and I don't like wokeness when it's on the right. Well, the woke right, number one, it's important for us to recognize that it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Okay, so this is my response. I said, because she's basically saying, well, people were being woke, on the left in 2020, saying, well, we have a bunch of white supremacists, and we have systematic, discrimination on the books, against minorities, particularly black people. And in 2025, she's saying it's still wokeness. It's the same thing, but now it's wokeness, for conservatives on the right, that accuses us of anti-white racism. The us in that case would be our nation as a whole, our policies, things on the books, and of course minority people, saying that they're the ones who are being racist, but it's just against it's anti-white racism. So here's my response. I said option number one, just two sides of the same Marxist coin, right? So there's your James Lindsay, absolute. I mean this is an atheist, who gave his early life towards trying to ultimately destroy the church and destroy Christian faith and Christian teachings, and devoted himself to hating Christ, and now by his own admission and his own post on social media is going to events and checking out girls' butts with his bisexual daughter. So there's James Lindsay for you, platformed by Reformed ministers, of course. But that's James Lindsay, his idea. He's the one who kind of coined the phrase, the woke right, and is basically just saying that it's all the Hegelian dialectic, Marxist, Foucault, whatever. That's, so that's his position, is it's just two sides of the coin. The left was being woke against white people and saying that they're, supremacists and discriminating in 2020. And now, 5 years later, the right, they're being, now we have the woke right, and they're saying, no, there's racism. It's not that white people are racist, it's that people are racist against white people. So option number one is that both sides are wrong, that both sides really are woke, that there's a woke left and there's a woke right, and it's just two sides of the same Marxist coin. And so we just need to put the woke away wherever we find it. Anything that looks at, group dynamics, identity politics, any claim that, that one group is being disenfranchised or disadvantaged is just being woke, is just has a victim complex, and we just need to get rid of that rhetoric, altogether, wherever we find it, on the right or on the left. That's option one, just two sides of the same Marxist coin. Option two, now, both groups were actually telling the truth. So they're not Marxists, they're both truthful, and they were telling the truth at the time. All right, so the woke left was telling the truth in 2020. You really did have white supremacy and black people. LeBron James, he nailed it. Black people were being just shot dead in the streets and hunted down by police officers. Unarmed, peaceful black people like LeBron James were afraid to leave their homes because they were just being hunted down. By the thousands and maybe even the millions, just millions of people just shot, unarmed, minding their own business. They were just going out of their house to check the mail, and police officers and SWAT teams, were surrounding them and lining them up, shooting squads and just killing them. And that was happening. That really was happening in 2020. And so the woke left was telling the truth. But To finish what I wrote here, option 2 is both groups were truthful at the time, and America's racial consciousness turned on a dime. And so, it's a modern phenomenon. It's never happened before, in all of history, but it happened this time. This time it happened that in 5 short years, we went from being a white supremacist country, hunting black people, unarmed black men in the street, to being all of a sudden a people who actually are discriminating against white people. And the nation as a whole, the judicial system, the standards for Harvard, and all of our Ivy League schools, all of our Fortune 500 companies and their hiring practices, and all these things in 5 short years actually reversed. So both groups, the woke left and the alleged woke right, which again doesn't exist, but let's just pretend it does, both groups who are crying foul when it comes to race relations in the United States, both were actually telling the truth at the time, and things just completely switched in 5 short years. So that's an option. So option number 1, both groups, woke left and the alleged woke right, are just 2 sides of the same Marxist coin. We just got to put the woke away wherever we find it. Option number 2, both groups were actually being truthful at the time. In 2020, black people were being hunted. And in 2025, there's discrimination on the books against white people. And then option 3, and I put in parentheses there, because I know this sounds insane. It's going to be really hard for some of our listeners to fathom that this would even be expressed as a viable option, that it could even be possible. But option 3, parentheses, I said pretty crazy, I know. Here's an option. One group lied and the other is telling the truth. Maybe. One group lied and the other is telling the truth. So that's the tweet. Nathan, you can go ahead and put it back on us. I'll break that down a little bit more. What I mean by that is here's one potential. It could be that you have the woke left and the alleged woke right, and both of them are just, saying that there's, discrimination against one race. The woke left is saying it's against minorities, particularly black people, and the woke right now, is saying it's against white people. And neither one is telling the truth. Both are lying, and it's just a victim mentality, and it's just wokeness, and we should put away the woke wherever we find it.
It's that same critical race theory lens, that same lens of power, same lens of oppression.
It's just a Marxist paradigm. Yeah, it's just Marxists everywhere. They're just absolutely everywhere. You got white Marxists, and you've got, black Marxists, and you just got Marxists on, anywhere you look, you can find a Marxist. So that's one scenario. That's the James Lindsay scenario. Probably shouldn't go with that because it's absolutely stupid. But then, what I'm carving out as this third scenario is that what if wokeness, the only wokeness that exists, which is leftist, right? So it's not the woke left, it's just the woke. What if they lied? What if they said that black people were being discriminated against and they weren't? What if, in fact, instead of black people being discriminated against, what if on the books, whether it's trying to get into university, whether it's trying to get hired at a job, in churches, what if, and I know this sounds crazy, but what if there were well-known pastors who were literally saying out loud publicly in their sermons that they would hire an African-American 7 over an Anglo 8, right? What if
mainline denominations, right? Not Protestant, ostensibly conservative, certainly.
Right, not a conservative denomination. They would never do that. No. But what if, Matt Chandler and J.D. Greear, so what if at the church level, the university level, the corporate level, at every single level, what if the woke left, which is just the woke, it's the only woke that exists, what if they were just lying? What if they were just lying? And when they were saying that black people are disparaged and disenfranchised, and there's all this, evidence of police brutality, what if it turns out that the number was not in the millions or even the thousands or even the hundreds, but what if it was 18 unarmed black men that were shot by a police officer, and even those 18 are questionable because they reached into their pocket and pulled out a vape that looked like a gun, these kinds of... So what if they just lied? What if there actually was no discrimination whatsoever, nothing that could be, discerned, certainly not systematic, not widespread, against minorities and black people in 2020, and the woke left, aka the only woke that exists, really was just that, woke, and they were full of it, and they lied. And then what if in 2025, when people say, but there actually are discriminations on the books systematic and widespread against white people, what if they're actually telling the truth? What if they, what if, for instance, somebody wrote an entire book called The Unprotected Class, and let's just hypothetically say the author's name is Jeremy Carl, and he kept, detailed receipts and actually showed that in the year of our Lord, 2021 and 2 and 3 and 4, all the way up until recently, and even still now, that if you were a black man, you actually were advantaged, not disadvantaged, but advantaged. Like you could actually get better jobs. You could get into an Ivy League school with lower test scores. You had every advantage in being a minority and every disadvantage in being white, particularly a white heterosexual male. So what if discrimination actually has existed in our country in the technical, truest, on the books type of sense? And it's existed for at least a decade and a half, maybe 10 to 20 years on the books, and it's real, but it's actually just against white people. Like, what if our country actually just hates white people? Well, in that kind of scenario, if that be the case, and I think it is, and if that be the case, then we still need to be mature, we still need to be Christians, but it is perfectly permissible, and I would argue even a moral imperative that we say something, that we say, this is wrong, this is immoral, this is wicked, and God hates it. This kind of discrimination against any group of people on the basis of something like race is wrong. And I would go further, and I'll say it because I already said it publicly with Elijah Schaefer last week on his show. But I would say that it's particularly wrong. It's particularly wrong because it would be wrong if the same policies were on the books in our nation against blacks, which they're not. That's not the case. But if that was the case, I would argue for that being immoral. But I'm going to make the point that I believe it is not just immoral in the way it would be in either direction, but it is especially immoral when a nation, its elites, corporately, politically, culturally, academically, at every level, when a nation disparages a group of people on the basis of race, and they target a particular group of people who their fathers are the ones who founded the nation. Now, I'm aware, okay, I don't want to be ridiculous here, I'm aware that there are white people currently who are citizens of the United States who cannot track their lineage back to the founders. I'm aware of that. There have been immigrants, waves of immigrants that have come, not just from third world countries. These days, it's primarily third world countries, but historically, there are people who entered into this American project of European descent, whether it's from France or whether it's from Italy or whether it's from, England or whatever it may be, and who, like you may be one of these people. Like I have friends who are German, for instance, who they're first generation in America, right? So they can't say, my fathers fought the war for independence. No, not really. No, they didn't. You just showed up, and and that's fine, but you just showed up. And, we should be honest about that. But what I am saying is that it would be one thing if our country said, you know what, there are some privileges. And I'm not advocating for this, okay? But I'm just saying, right, Stephen Wolfe does this, in his book, Christian, like I'm making an argument on the basis of permissibility, okay? It would be one thing if a particular nation said, we are not going to afford the same degree of certain rights, like voting, for instance. So I would argue for equality under the law. Under the law, I don't think anybody should just be let off the hook, and I don't think someone should be overly penalized either. In the sight of God, the eternal ultimate sense, we're image bearers of the triune God, and in the eternal sense, there's an innate dignity and value and worth. So spiritually speaking, no inequality. And under the law, judicially speaking, I would advocate for no inequality on the basis of race. That said, if there were other privileges, things that are not They're not human rights. Voting is not a human right. It's not. I know you think it is. It's not. Universal suffrage is not in the Bible. It is not a sin to have a country that does not practice universal suffrage. So certain things that are not rights, but rather privileges, and voting is a privilege. It is a privilege. If a nation said, we are not going to extend some of these privileges, not just rights, but privileges to certain groups of people who have been here for 15 minutes. Like they attain citizenship, but there's a class of citizenship when it comes not to rights under the law or our view of people in the eternal spiritual sense in the sight of God, but when it comes to certain privileges. Voting is just one example I'm using for this case study. If that was argued for on the basis of an argument from permissibility, there's nothing inherently immoral or unbiblical about that. From a Christian foundation, that is not a sin, in other words. But if a nation did that, and they chose that the group, not only that they would retract certain privileges, but they would actually even begin to erode certain rights. And the people, the identity group that they focused in on to do that with, was particularly the identity group that was the native population of the nation itself. Right? The founders, they said who they were doing all this for, their blood, their sweat, their tears. They weren't doing it for India. They said for us and our posterity. That means our great, 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 great grandchildren. And if a nation and its elites and its leaders said, we're going to have unequal weights and measures, and the people who are going to get the short end of the stick are actually going to be the people that the founders said they were doing everything for. From a Christian standpoint, that's what you call wicked. That's wicked. So I don't want to hear any more of this bullcrap about the woke right. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. And the reality is that so many people, because so many normies, which God bless them, but so many normie, conservative, salt of the earth, blue collar people, they're actually not racist. They're not. And because they're not racist, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. And so for them, like that, they have every inclination because they don't have prejudice and any animosity in their hearts. Every inclination within them is just, can we please stop talking about this? Can we please put the woke away? And so for them, they're particularly susceptible to deceptive framework that guys like James Lindsay are presenting. It is deceitful. So the average normie who thinks the woke right is a thing, I'm pretty sympathetic, honestly. I'm not sympathetic with James Lindsay because he knows what he's doing.
Or Neil Shenvi.
Neil Shenvi knows what he's doing. He's being a snake. He is. Well, there's wokeness on the right. Meanwhile, he's a member at J.D. Greer's church, who literally said not only with his church, but with the entire SBC, the largest Christian denomination in the United States of America. And he point blank publicly said, and he bragged about it as a point of pride. He said, we've hired less than 50% people, appointed less than 50% people in positions over different committees and leadership in the SBC since I've been in charge. And so over half, and it's been intentional, and we're proud of it, over half has been people of color and women. And he bragged about it. When that's your pastor, you just don't get to talk about the alleged woke right. You need to, I'll use a woke phrase. This is a classic, an old-time favorite. Remember this rhetoric? Sit down, shut up. Right? That's what white people were told to do. Well, in the case of Neil Shenvi,
the church we attended at the time said, if you're white, you need to sit down and shut up and listen.
Right.
After George Floyd.
So I think, to bring about an old classic, woke favorite, bring it out of the vault and use it for Neil Shenvi. His pastor's woke. Right. And so I think, I'm speaking his language here, becoming all things to all men. Neil Shenvi, sit down and shut up. Sit down and shut up. No, there actually is prejudice in our nation. But it's against white people. It is. We know that's the case. It's on the books. Again, I refer people to reading Jeremy Carl's book, The Unprotected Class. So that's framing all this up. Okay, a couple more things real quick, and then we're going to go to a commercial break, and we're going to bring on Dominique. So the event at hand, right? What is the event that started circulating yesterday that just took place? Well, you have a white woman, and she's, at the park with her kids, and there's a young black boy. We don't really know his age. People are saying 5 years old. I've seen the blurred out photo. He looks a little older than 5 to me.
He's a big boy if he is 5.
He's a big boy. He could be 5. It's possible, but he looks like he's like 12, but a young boy, black boy, is there unattended. So his parents are nowhere to be found. He's at this public playground, and he's stealing things out of this woman's purse. She's taking things. And she, because no one else is parenting him, apparently, she decides to extend a little bit of some parenting lessons, and she does so in an unsavory way. Now, I don't think that this is the way to do it, okay? So let the record state clearly. And there's a lot of people who disagree with me. People are mad right now. And I understand the anger. I get it. So I don't want to disparage people who are mad. But there are people, who are disagreeing with me because I posted today, what happened. And people are like, well, she's completely justified in using the N-word with this kid. And because he's behaving like an N-word. That's the argument that people were using with me. And I disagree. And I want the record to state. I think that, she could have gone to him and said, hey, this is what I would have done. Hey, we don't do that. No, this is not yours. This is not your property. Where are your parents? Well, my parents aren't here. Do you need me to call someone for you? I can call someone for you. You don't need to be here by yourself. That's not safe. Well, no. Okay, well, then you need to go home. You need to go home. You're here. You're alone. You don't have your parents' parental supervision, and you're trying to steal things, and that's wrong.
One of the claims, too, is that he's autistic. Obviously, we don't know the boy. We don't know the certainty of it. Minnesota has some of the highest rates of autism in the nation. It's like top 5. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that diagnosis can be driven by the grants and the help that you'll get in school because of that. So this is not saying he for sure is just, perfectly normal kid that has a little bit of tics. They slapped an autism diagnosis on him. However, that does happen. So that claim of autism does not necessarily mean 100% this kid he just doesn't know what he's doing. Right. He's barely functional. And regardless of whatever he was unsupervised.
Right. So then the next piece of the puzzle is that all of a sudden somebody, TikToker, starts filming her, and she doubles down. And he's like, you said this word, the N-word, to a little boy, and you're doing this, you're doing that. And so then she uses the word again and says, yes, I am, and flips off, the guy who's using his cell phone to record.
Man, Somalian, actually, it seems.
Right. But in this case, we're talking about a foreigner, from what we can tell, right. A Somalian, who we won't say this definitively because I've seen evidence kind of pointing towards both sides on this, but allegedly could be someone who was recently tried in court for sexual assault of a minor.
Just charged, and then charges dropped.
Right. Yep. Charged in court right. And so the charge was dropped, but I don't know about you, but I personally have never even been charged.
Me either. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Turns out not everyone has been charged for, sexual assault of a minor. So
16-year-old.
Even if you're not found guilty, that's a little peculiar, and so you have, from what we can tell, a Somalian man. It does seem as though he's a foreigner who's a TikToker, who's also a person of color, minority, and who was, potentially, if it's the same guy, and it looks like it may be, but we'll say it allegedly, was not found guilty, but charged for a pretty heinous crime with a minor. And he's now making this woman go viral.
He deleted it initially. This happened on Wednesday, so it's Friday today. This happened on Wednesday. He deleted it, but it was picked up by another type of grifting page that was like, can you believe this woman did X, Y, and Z? Classic.
Okay, so that takes place. And then, the last piece of the puzzle here is that this woman or a friend, and Dominique's going to answer some of these questions, someone else on her behalf started a GoFundMe. And the purpose of it was because of this viral video and her being recorded, it went viral, and then people immediately came out of the woodwork to dox her. And they've doxed her social security number, her address, the school that the kids are in, her family, so her parents and other extended family members. And so basically, and doxing, people need to realize this because Christians, well, I don't know if they're Christians, but they claim to be Christians. Christians or demons, the Lord knows. Ultimately, he judges, the hearts of men, but we'll dox all the time and think that it's like some kind of... This is why doxing is immoral, especially with these kinds of situations. It really is tantamount to murder. It really is, because what you're doing, if you ever watch like the movie, not endorsing it, but Purge, like where there's like one night a year where it's open season and it's free for anybody to commit murder. With a situation like this, with racial tensions as high as they currently are in our country, and all this on the heels of a black boy stabbing a 17-year-old white boy in the heart with a knife and killing him in cold blood, right? That happened just a couple weeks ago. With that as our backdrop, when you make a woman go viral for saying the N-word, and you're not providing all the context, you're just making her, look like a monster. And again, I wouldn't have said it. Not my cup of tea. I don't think that was a good look. Don't think that was the right thing to do. But in this racial climate, to make a woman like that go viral, millions and millions of views, with the tensions that we currently have, what you're doing by doxing her address, her social security number, the school that her kids are in, other family members that are related to her, is you are literally putting out, you're putting a hit on someone, and you're saying, it is now open season. Come, find her, kill her son, kill them. It is tantamount. You are wishing murder upon someone. That's what you're doing. You are wishing murder upon someone. So she has this GoFundMe page now because she has to move. She has to find another, and it's not cheap. She has to find another residence. Ideally, honestly, because they'll probably come after her and try to find her. Ideally, like now it's really not cheap. She needs to be able to open a trust and buy a property in that trust that's unrelated in its name so that her address is not publicly posted so that nobody can find her. She has to change her cell phone number. She has to potentially also help every member of her family move. She has to change schools for her children. All these things potentially just to stay alive. That's how tense things are right now. That's how tense they are.
Someone said the irony is if that kid, say he was a little older and he stabbed her over the contents of her purse, we wouldn't even know who she was. Yep. Stabbing on the playground, woman dead. It's another Thursday. Another day that ends in Y. And so that's the situation. And that, again, on the heels of the Karmelo Anthony story. And so people are saying, oh, look, it's just the woke right. Tomato, tomato. Just the Hegelian dialect, just Marxism on both sides. Yeah, on one hand, you have, a GoFundMe for Karmelo Anthony. And on the other hand, you have a GoFundMe for this white woman, and so there's just ethno-nationalism, on both sides. And it's just, we need to put the woke away wherever we find it. Guys, I don't know how to tell you. It's not the same. The GoFundMe for Karmelo Anthony, all right? This is the last tweet that I wanted to share. Nathan, can you pull this one up? This is the one related to the situation. Here we go. I said, what she said is wrong. And I got a lot of flack for that first sentence because people they're just mad. They're angry. What she said is wrong. But doxing her address, social security number, etc., is a far greater evil because it really is tantamount to murder. It is. She received financial assistance with her GoFundMe to spare her life, for her defense, for her safety. Karmelo Anthony received financial assistance so he could take someone else's life with impunity. That's the difference. She's receiving financial assistance to spare her life and her son. Karmelo Anthony received financial assistance so that he could take someone's life with impunity. If you can't see the difference, then you're the one who is woke in tweet. That's the situation right now. We have got to sort this out. This whole woke left, woke right thing. Guys, you've been duped. I get it. You're just a normie evangelical. You love your wife. You love your kids. You love your local church. You want to be able to grill on the 4th of July. Like don't tread on me. You've got the little, the snake flag, and that's great.
you guys, you're salt of the earth. You're the guys who came out in droves and elected Trump, and those are my people. You're my people, and I love you, and I don't want to disparage you. But if you don't understand what's going on, then just don't talk about it. Just kind of touch grass and log off, and because you don't get it. You're great. Again, I'm not trying to be rude. You are my people. I pastor these people. I love these people. They're just like, can we just get back to not being racist in any direction? And can we just get back
colorblind?
Be colorblind, meritocracy. And I get it. I understand that sentiment. I do. And the answer is no. No. Can we just get back to no? No, we can't. I'm sorry, we can't. And it's like, why? You're a Christian pastor saying that we can't get back to no, we can't. And there are technical, objective reasons for that. One, you want to get back to the 1990s. I get it. Number one, we can't get back to it because I'll list some reasons. Number one, we have had 30 to 40 million immigrants come into our country just in the last 4 years. And since the 90s, you're looking at anywhere from 50 to 100 million. There's 50 to 100 million people who shouldn't be here. The fabric of the country has radically shifted. It's not the same country. It's not a high trust society. These aren't your fellow Americans. They're not. And so the country is different than the 1990s. So that's one reason. Number two, we can't get back to colorblind meritocracy in the 1990s, the good old days, because also we don't have the tough on crime policies that we had in the 90s. One of the reasons that you could be colorblind in the 1990s is because there are a lot of black people who are not stabbing people in the chest with a knife and killing them. There are. Thomas Sowell's not doing that. Clarence Thomas is not doing that. There's a lot of great black people who are Christian brothers and sisters in Christ, fellow Americans who are not doing that. But the ones who are in the 1990s, do you know where they were? They were in jail. So, part of MAGA, I think, needs to be MAPA. Or no, not MAPA, but MPGA. Yeah, make prisons great again. MPGA. Make prisons great until prisons are great again. Then it's just a different calculus. Going to the park in 2025, your neighborhood park, depending where you live, is a different calculus than it was going to the park in the night. There's a reason why kids, like I grew up in a world, as an older millennial, I grew up in a world where it was just be home by dinner. And the world was your oyster. You're on your bike, right? And you've got pegs on the front and on the back, so you're giving a pump to like two people at the same time, and you're going all over, who knows where. Like we had a river, in our neighborhood growing up, and we would take these barrels. I don't even know what they're called, but like they're filled with air. And I remember like we got ropes and we built, we worked really hard with, our hammer and nails and built like a deck and put these barrels on the bottom and did like a Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer raft, and got a sheet with a sail. And so like we're literally going down rivers. We saw alligators and water moccasins and we're swimming with them. And it was just like, it was all fair game.
Yeah.
That's just what kids do. You don't do that today. If you have kids and you love them, unless you live on 100 acres of private property with a gate around it, and you don't let your kids just go off. You can't. Why? Because it's not the same world. So the 1990s were tough on crime, whereas today, like Karmelo Anthony, I hope this isn't the case. I'm not saying that. I'm not predicting it. But let's just be honest, guys. There's a decent chance he gets off with self-defense for stabbing someone in the heart at a track meet. The 1990s, that wasn't happening, right? Somebody stabs someone and they go to jail, or they get the electric chair.
That's the true punishment. It should be not just prison. Like
right? No, it only. Should be capital punishment. When I say make prisons great again, it's because I'm a little black-pilled, and I know that the true penalty is barely even, probably not even on the table. So make prisons great again. In the meantime, until we have a Christian nationalist nation where we can actually have, just penalties according to God's standards, and not just prisons that actually punish the whole populace, because now all of us are paying through our tax dollars for room and board for somebody. So this one person commits a crime and all of us have to pay for it through our tax dollars. But in the meantime, we need a better prison system. So we have a flood of immigrants. That's changed in the last 30 years. Radical change. Our crime policies have been, tough on crime has been completely eroded because everybody said it was racist. And then the other reason we can't just go back is because of wokeness. The only woke that actually exists, that is the woke left. The reason why racial tensions, part of the reason that they're so high, is not only do you have a black woman stabbing 2 EMT workers in the back of an ambulance, or a black boy stabbing a white boy in the chest and killing him at a track meet, but you have this in the context. You have to look at the context. On the context of being told for the last 10 years that white people are racist oppressors. Mm-hmm. So the woke left, because they overplayed their hand, because they were race hustlers like Al Sharpton and Ibram Kendi, because of this, Robin DiAngelo, some of them were white, but because of the race hustlers and the woke movement and Black Lives Matter, which of course means buy large mansions, and the summer of George Floyd and mostly peaceful, riots and all these things for the past 5 years explicitly, but really arguably the past 10, 15 years going back, because of 50 to 100 million people flooding the country in the last 30 years, because of the woke left, the only woke that actually exists, and because of loose policies when it comes to crime, to where a bunch of people who should be in prison are not. For all of these reasons, well, here we are, and now we have to talk about it. And when guys talk about it, some guys can talk about it irresponsibly. I understand that. But when guys talk about it responsibly, the ascendant right, the dissident right, the new Christian right, whatever you want to call it, in our camp, and they talk about it responsibly, and you come out claiming to be a conservative, saying this is just the woke right, this is just two sides of the same Marxist coin. Shut up and sit down. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what and you think you're helping. You're not. You're not. If you don't even allow people to talk about this and to express their fears, their frustrations, their grievances, and appeal for solutions so that their families would be safe, and you just suppress that, and you tell them that they're racist and they can't speak and nothing's going to change, that's how you get a race war. Mark my words. That's how you pretty much guarantee a race war. And if it gets to that point, it will be brutal. Guys who are willing to talk about this carefully, biblically, and responsibly like us are actually trying to defuse a ticking time bomb that will be far more inhumane if it's not diffused when it finally goes off. A time is coming that if we do not change course, a time is coming where people will be begging for Joel Webbon. They'll be like, please, we'll talk to him. He's reasonable. Please bring back Joel Webbon. I'm sorry, we should have listened. That's the direction we're heading. It needs to be talked about. These are not the same. Oh, there's a GoFundMe for, a woman who did what? Who said a bad word. And then a GoFundMe for a black boy who murdered someone in cold blood at a high school track meet. This is not the same. One GoFundMe is so that this black young man can actually get off of the consequences for murder. This other GoFundMe is so that this white woman, who I believe was foolish and did say something that's unsavory and she shouldn't have said. But here's the point. I don't think she should have said that. But I don't think the threat of her son's safety is the appropriate consequence for saying an unsavory word. But that is the consequence that's been imposed on her regardless. She is now in danger. She is in physical danger. Her 2-year-old, whatever, he looks tiny, her tiny little tot, son is in physical danger. And they need money in order to move and to relocate.
Escape all the peaceful left and the peaceful black people.
Correct. So that's where we are. That's the situation. I think, I'm not trying to brag, but I think that's probably the most reasonable take that you'll find on the internet today. I'm not being unhinged. I'm not, going overboard. but it has to be addressed. It has to be talked about. We're going to go to our first commercial, and then Dominic is going to come on the scene. We've got him lined up, synced up in the waiting room, ready to go. And he has some breaking news and has talked to the person involved with the GoFundMe and all these different things. So you guys are actually going to get to see some behind the scenes on the situation that a lot of the public is not quite aware of.
What if your family's financial strategy was built on more than just numbers? What if it was built on scripture? At Private Family Banking, we believe managing wealth is more than just good planning. It's a God-given privilege and responsibility. In Genesis and Deuteronomy, and all the way into the New Testament, God calls us to be fruitful, wise, and faithful with what He provides. We help Christian individuals, families, and small businesses grow, protect, and pass on wealth anchored in timeless biblical principles to the glory of God in the advancement of His kingdom. Schedule your free discovery call today at liberationeconomy.com.
America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God and not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reece Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reece Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
All right, here we are. Dominic, help us out. What are some of the facts that you've been able to discover so far?
So, much like some of the things that you saw with the whole Karmelo Anthony case, you saw people being pretty outraged with the fact that the man raised over $500,000. So, you saw many posts. You saw quite a bit of pushback from some local groups, a little bit of protesting, but as far as the pushback against Shiloh Hendricks, now it's actually escalated to the point where the local chapter of the NAACP is getting involved, as well as several other local Minnesota civil rights organizations. Let's remember, guys, she's based in Rochester, Minnesota. And actually, the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis is not too far away from there. So as high as the racial tensions might be in the country in general, the racial tensions in Minnesota are particularly higher than that of the rest of the country. So first, last night around 8 p.m., you started to see a targeted sort of influencer campaign on Twitter with several pretty fairly sized influencers, as well as tons of different black activists that were just straight up calling for Give, Send, Go to shut down the campaign, which, that's a pretty obvious step that you would think that they tried to do. But then it went from trying to shut down the campaign to immediately calling for her arrest. So things overnight started to heat up, as the situation developed, and she ended up earning quite a bit more money. I believe now that total is over 350,000. As
365 right now.
200,000. So, yep. I mean, it's really growing at an aggressive rate. But anyways, this morning I received a report that the Rochester Police Department, they're actually conducting a preliminary investigation into Shiloh Hendricks now, due to all this pressure mounting from the NAACP as well as these civil rights organizations. So not only are they trying to come after this woman's money, not only did they dox her home, her gym, her son's school, all of her relatives' addresses, her previous relationships, all of her previous financials, everything about the woman. But now they're actually going to try to drum up some sort of charges, which I think are completely antithetical to freedom of speech and the First Amendment. I don't agree with the fact that she, said this to a 5-year-old little kid. However, I don't think that there's anything that's actually unlawful about that act itself. So
we have a news clip.
A lot of developing information. She did just release, I just got a text message here a few minutes ago that she did release an update on her GoFundMe page, just basically saying, thanking everyone. She's shocked at the the extreme amount of support that she's gotten. She has not mentioned anything. She hasn't been contrite. Like in the message that she wrote on her initial GoFundMe page, she said that she called him what he was. So I'm not exactly sure if this person is just like an outright racist, like outside of this particular incident or what, but I don't know, man. She seems to be pretty defiant, and she kind of has taken this all in. I'm not sure if she's going to do interviews and things like that or what, but this is a little bit more viral than cases like this usually go. I've never seen anything like this before, particularly around like a white solidarity type of thing.
Right.
I've never seen this. Have you guys ever witnessed anything like this?
White solidarity has not existed in a very, very long time.
Maybe Kyle Rittenhouse. But that was more of like a 2A.
Weren't black.
You're right. Yeah.
That was more of like a Second Amendment solidarity.
Let's show some of the comments, actually. I polled, and I'm not polling these to be like, look at this, guys, we're back based, but just as an objective statement of fact. I'm going to show you just 3 images of comments. On the Give, Send, Go, there's tons of comments. Here's some of the ones from the people that gave to the campaign. You're an inspiration. It's time white people stood up. Anonymous giver, $15. Frey Bentos, good job on not relaxing around them. Keep your chin up. Anonymous giver, $100. We have all had enough. Why was a pedophile not deported? So this is related to the allegations. They may be true, they may not. The man filming was a pedophile. What is he doing in the park? Is the so-called autistic boy even his son? By the way, looks way older than 5, probably just violent, billed as autistic so the family can collect extra benefits. They gave $100. Narda Brooks, $20. Let's help this young lady make her life as stress-free for as long as we can. Stay safe, stay aware, file restraining orders, and get police protection. A black man and his family are profiting in the hundreds of thousands for his murder of a young white man. Make that look like pennies, people. God bless you. From Alberta, Canada. Most base Canadian, I think.
Yeah, and that person is going to get deported from Canada.
And it's funny because I remember looking at the Anthony Karmelo fundraiser. Every comment on there was, you go boy, white people have it out for you, God's going to protect you. You're kind of seeing 2 different Americas in the support for one person and here the support for another.
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't seen, to answer your question, Dominic, I think you're right. I have not seen that kind of solidarity around race for white people. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen solidarity around race for every group of people except for white people. We've seen that for years and years and years and years. But no, I think it's different. My working theory, simplest theory, is I think part of it is just in the case of Europe and America, that white people were the hegemony, and like when you think of like Jews, for instance, it's like they've always kind of been a minority. Other than in Israel, they've been kind of a minority in whatever country they've lived in. And so they are going to be preferring one another and doing business to with one another and those kinds of things. It's all about who networking. I'm hiring this person's son because he's a good Jewish boy, and this person, and we're going to marry, our arranged marriages, my daughter, your son, and keep it in the family, so business wise, marriages, and all those kinds of things. That tends to be how minorities think, and I'm not even saying there's anything inherently wrong with that. But I think when it comes to European and American context with particularly white people, we've just we've always assumed hegemony, and so when you think of even with Catholics, so it's not even race based but just religious based. You think of why are Protestants 50, 60, 70 years behind the Catholics in terms of starting Protestant schools? And the answer, of course, is because the public schools in America were the Protestant schools. The public schools had catechisms, scripture reading, prayer, Bible classes. The public school, the state school in America, was a Protestant school because we were a Protestant country. It was founded by, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? That's the whole idea of WASP. It wasn't a Catholic country. It was a Protestant country with a Protestant founding. And so Catholics were ahead of the curve, and now that everything's been secularized and moved away from Christianity, Protestants are having to catch up when it comes to schooling and education. But the reason Catholics were ahead of the curve is because they there weren't Catholic schools, from the start, from the very get-go, because they were the minority. It's when some Irish and especially Italians, when they came, they were the minority. They were the guests coming into somebody else's country, and so they built their own thing. So I think my theory is that that basically what we see going on, this is a phenomenon, and that's why it's worthy of some cultural commentary. But what we see happening is really, in many ways, for the first time in decades and decades and decades, you see coming out in droves. It's not small. Coming out in droves, like a white solidarity. And I think the only way you get that, because I don't think white people naturally think that way. At least they haven't in a very long time. I think the reason why that's rising is because they're quickly becoming the minority. And that's how minorities think. Minorities think in terms of group dynamics, and we need to stick together. We need to protect our own. And so as white people are losing their country, as there's just a flood of third world immigrants, Haitians and Somalians, and you get to come and you get to, as white people are feeling dispossessed, and they're feeling, like their backs are against the ropes more and more and more, I don't think we see less of this. I don't think this is just like a one-off, fluke. I think these are like kind of like the
this is the beginning,
like the pre-rumblings of the big one, the big earthquake that is coming as the Saxon learns to hate. So yeah.
If I might offer a theory, so I think that in a deep innate level, humans are all tribalistic to a degree. And I think that for several decades now, particularly since after the Second World War, white people have been conditioned and propagandized to be timid and tolerant and think about everybody else's feelings besides themselves. We've constantly, at first we were just automatically kind of the ruling class of this country. You look at all the presidents, you look at, really all the prominent figures in America, throughout all of history, only until about 60 years ago or so. And all of them are men and all of them are white. And I think that just this constant conditioning over the years, it really did indoctrinate people to a degree. And now through the proliferation, especially of social media and independent media, because you're no longer just hearing Walter Cronkite on the television set. You're no longer hearing Dan Rather or whoever the most, Jesse Waters or whatever today. You're hearing just regular people that very well may have a large platform and that are they're distributing ideas that you've never heard before. And I think that people are realizing also just through lived experience, looking at crime statistics, seeing all this constant, endless video streams regarding black violence that you constantly see. I think that white people are ultimately realizing that if they do not display some degree of solidarity or some bit of shared identity, that eventually we really will be facing, an extreme level at harm at least, or perhaps if you really want to go hardcore, eventual extinction. Because like you were saying, Pastor Joel, I mean, these mass immigration trends coinciding with the birth rates of white Christians, it is not if, it is when we will be fully replaced. And then once we're fully replaced, how is the governing body going to act and treat us then? Because most of the people that will make up the government feel that we have a historical and ancestral debt that we owe to them simply for being born, for a history that many of us have nothing to do with. So I just don't think that many normal, loving white Christian Americans really understand that if you just look at what's happened in South Africa, if you looked at what's happened in Canada, if you looked at what's happening in Europe, other people that are foreigners that are not part of our country, they enter into it and then they begin to dominate because they have cultures that allow them to do things like move in with several other families. When someone moves to America, that's coming from a third world country. They literally move into a house with like 2 of their brothers, their families. There might be 14 people in a single family home that maybe you'd have 4 or 5 people in. It's just, that creates competition for people for homes. That actually drives wages lowers. It hurts all Americans that actually have a right to be here as citizens, many of them for several generations. And so I just don't think people understand that the time for tolerance and the time for, being nice just for being nice sake, it has to come to an end. We have to treat this pragmatically. Of course, we want to be respectful of other people. If you're already here and you're a legal resident of the country, in my opinion, there's not too much we can do. But if we want to ensure that we're going to grow up and our children are going to grow up in a country that resembles anything like what we grew up in, we have to do this. The deportations, the locking people up in cities. You mentioned earlier that you want to make prisons great again. I truly believe that in the largest cities with the highest crime rates, we should temporarily militarize those cities in order to get them under control. I am from St. Louis, Missouri, which has the highest murder rate in the United States. 91% of homicides here in St. Louis, they're committed by African Americans. You have to understand the statistics that we're talking about here. And I understand that some Americans may not have the stomach to actually see through with some of the solutions I think are going to be necessary to shift our country back on a foundational course that I think is best for everyone. But we have to do these things. Otherwise, not only will the white race eventually go extinct or be under extreme duress, but we will quite literally lose the country all to foreigners and people that do not share our values. They hate our history, and it's an emergency. I think people need to treat it as such.
Speaking of the statistics, this is just one that I think puts a point on it. We've talked about some of these before. This one's pretty incredible. This is from 2018, the Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey, and it's interracial violence per capita. So white on black, the incidence per 100,000 white people is 30. So 30 out of 100K. That number for black on white is 1,288. The difference between the two is 42 times.
Right.
This is not like, we're talking about a violence differential and it's 3 times as much. According to these statistics, violent incidents, 42 times higher from white to black, black to white. Joel, you were talking about like unarmed black men earlier. Guys, the statistics are overwhelmingly on our side.
And very obviously for the audience, guys, it's like it really doesn't matter what race it is. If it was any group of people that was committing crimes at this sort of a statistical clip, we'd be outraged and we'd be asking for the same thing. So the fact that it happens to be a certain people, I can speak for all of us when I say, of course, we don't hate these people. We want the best for everyone in the country, black, white, wherever, whoever you are. But when the statistical anomalies are this great, it is. It's not dutiful. We would be ignoring just logic. We would be ignoring what we need to do. Ultimately, you cannot change what you cannot confront. So when we say these things, just understand it must be confronted in order for us to ever actually take action on this.
Yep. Dominic, I want to ask you, there were some comments in the chat. What sorts of charges would the NAACP even be looking to level at Shiloh? And have you done any other research on when civil rights activist groups have gotten involved and leveled charges in terms of like their success or the fallout to the people that the charges are filed against? Or what exactly would she be looking at in this situation?
So they would be totally drummed up and falsified and inappropriate in this case. But what she'd be looking at most likely would be something like disorderly conduct. They could perhaps even try to levy like a child endangerment charge. It would be something along those lines, or perhaps a public nuisance for doing something like this on public federal land. I don't think it's going to be anything that is really going to get her in super serious hot water. But again, when you're dealing with very politicized court systems, especially ones that already have passed a lot of legislation based off of racial tensions because of George Floyd, anything could happen. But it would be most likely one of those 3 charges.
And they could go after her kids too, is the point. So the charge be it what it may, but then also you're not a good mother, and so the state's going to
because she has a misdemeanor one or two misdemeanors on her record already, right?
2014, a DWI, driving while intoxicated, I believe.
Somebody in the chat.
Michael, you mentioned also, what's happened in other similar situations like this. This one is a little unique in the sense that there's no physical altercation at all. It is just saying a word. So more than likely, and in all of the previous instances that are similar to this, it's usually just extreme reputational harm. So, you're afraid to go anywhere. You have to quit your job. You lose everything. You have to move. All the things you basically already know. But that's a given at this point. But as far as them, activists or civil rights organizations being able to actually force charges, that's more of like a Derek Chauvin type of thing. Like there was legitimate political motivation from different groups and from the court system because they were afraid that people would riot. In this instance, I don't think it's nearly that serious, so they won't lay on the pressure like that.
Real quick, I wanted to point out a comment in the chat that, giving this person the benefit of the doubt, it sounds like they just tuned in and probably missed the first half of this episode. So I would humbly refer them back to the beginning of the episode. They should check it out because I addressed all this. But this is Kushik, I guess. It's Koushik, Kushik. He said, or she said, Black people, we are being victimized. Brown people, we are being victimized. White people, we are being victimized. And then they said, we live in a funny world, LOL. And that's kind of what I was addressing in the first half of this video. So anybody who's just tuning in now on the live video, I encourage you, this is an episode. It's not always the case, but this is an important one. I encourage you to go back and start from the beginning and just realize why. I understand. I think that's kind of, again, that's the normie. That is the normie heartbeat of America that just wants to say, look, we, like most Americans, most white Americans are not racist. They're just not, they don't, like, let's just, let bygones be bygones and, my fellow Americans and let's just live peaceable lives and love our neighbors regardless of what color they are. Let's go back to the 1990s, color blindness, put the woke away and wherever we find it, the woke left, or the woke right. And that's just, the problem with that sentiment is you're lumping all these things together. Black people saying we're victimized, brown people saying we're victimized, white people saying we're victimized. But what that doesn't stop and consider, even for just a moment, is, but what if one of those groups is telling the truth?
Yep.
Could we just consider that? And what if there was data? Like what if you could actually look and see, okay, for every time that a white person kills a black person kills a white person 42 times. A 1 to 42 ratio.
Violent
incidents. It's violent
offense. Okay.
Yeah.
So some of those being homicides, some of those just some kind of
assault.
Yeah. But that's, a 42 time multiple. That's significant. And that's just in terms of interpersonal feuds and crime. But then looking on the books in terms of systems, looking at universities. And okay, if you're black, then, your SAT scores can be substantially lower, But if you're white or in many cases, if you're Asian, then we're going to have double standards. We're going to have a much higher so getting into universities systematically is harder. It's objectively harder. And these things have been proven. They're changing now, allegedly. We'll see. But then corporate America, the top, the Fortune 100. So the top 100 companies in America. So it's not just like talking about 100 mom and pop shops. We're talking about the top 100 companies in America representing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees between them. Each of these companies could easily have 100,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 employees. So the top 100 Fortune 100 companies in America, they explicitly told us, with wokeness and DEI programs, they told us what they were going to do. They said, we are going to prioritize women and people of color. women and people of color. And then it was either 2022 or 2023, but the data came back in and it showed that from the top Fortune 100 companies in America, that only 6% of their new hires for that whole year was white men. And
yes,
so
I have that article in my hand right now. Corporate America. Because prepared.
You want to show it?
Well, it would be difficult for me to show it on the, but actually you can see it a little bit.
Yeah, it looks pretty good actually.
Yeah.
But here, I'll just read it real quick. Corporate America promised to hire a lot more people of color, and they actually did. The year after Black Lives Matter protests, the S&P 100 added more than 300,000 jobs. 94% of them went to people of color. So when people talk about discrimination, whether it be academically or occupationally, I just want people to understand this very clearly. You could be someone with a perfect SAT score. You could be someone that has every recommendation. You have the straight A's, 4.5 GPA, went to the best school. But simply if you are a white guy, they won't take you. Same with admissions to several Ivy League schools and things of that nature. Now, apparently some of that might change, but to all of these people, all these non-whites that insist that they are dealing, they are working against white privilege and that particularly white males are at any type of advantage. I can actually tell you, and if you look at several statistics regarding average salaries now, females are even being paid more than white men for jobs where we used to outpace them by quite a lot. So they are stuck on historical, they're stuck on things that happened in the past, but they are no longer applying. And it's actually the reverse. Particularly white straight men are at the most disadvantaged position when looking for a job or for applying for a college these days. And this is observable and it's not debatable. However, these people jam it down your throat like you're lying or you're espousing some white supremacist talking point. It's really ridiculous. It really is.
Yeah. Imagine, you're right. Imagine that you're a young white man and you just graduated, school, and you're looking for a job, and it happens to be, 2021, 2022. And Dominique just showed you the article. You're not getting a job, not a good one, not a good, you want to work for one of the best companies in America. Tough break. So to say that this is the larger context that we just have to be honest about. We're not saying that that we should, the woke left lied in one direction, and so now, the dissident right should lie in the other. No, nobody should be lying, but we just should tell the truth. And the reality is that wokeness lied by saying that, black men were being, unarmed black men being hunted down the street. They weren't. Right. But white men are being disenfranchised. See, one of those narratives is true. And what does this have to do with the Bible? What does it have to do with Christianity? Well, Christians have a vested interest in the truth. Christians have a vested interest in the truth. That's why it matters. That's why we're talking about it. We're talking about it because it's true. And the last thing I was going to say is, Dominique mentioned, trying to right wrongs of the past. And even that, respectfully, I think that is also worth objecting to. And this is why. What about all the atrocities, of sub-Saharan, African tribes, or for that matter, indigenous tribes in North America? What about all the things well, for one, we don't know all the atrocities. We know some of them, but we don't know many of them. One reason why it's easy to pick on white people when it comes to history is because white people kept records. White people actually wrote things down. And white people were actually honest when they kept the records and wrote things down. So number one, the fact that we actually had a language in written form and kept meticulous records and books and told the truth. So it's really easy to pick on a society that has published everything that they've done for 1,000 years, all the way back to King Alfred. It's kind of hard to do that with an Indian tribe that's drawing buffalo, with berries on the side of a cave. It's just a little bit different. So, white people Western societies are an easy target, one, because they actually kept records. Secondly, The whole world had slaves, guys. The whole world had slaves. The Ottoman Empire had slaves. Romans had slaves. Africans, where do you think the slaves came from? This is not white people going into the bush in Africa and capturing people. This is people are lined up on the shore, on the Ivory Coast for sale because other African tribes had conquered them, taken those people as property, as slaves, and were selling them, right? And you look at that and you look at where did all these African slaves with the transatlantic slave trade go? Well, I might be off a little bit. I'm working from memory here. It's been a while since I've done the reading, but I think it was like 13% went to America and Canada.
I think it was less than that.
Less. So the other 87% plus went to other countries, not the United States. They went to other countries. They went to other African countries. They went to a lot of Asian countries.
Brazil.
They went to South American.
Brazil
a lot.
Yeah,
you want to talk about slavery? Like, well, I want to see some people pick on Brazil for once. You know,
equal opportunity.
Let's pick on the Brazilians. You know, those guys bought way more slaves. And go ahead.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to say for the people that still have such a gripe about slavery, and I mean this in a very in a sensitive way. I don't mean to be offensive at all. But would you rather have that event not happened and you live literally in Africa, or are you grateful that your ancestors had to endure something that you did not, and now you live in the greatest country in the world, in the richest country in the world, in the country that has the most opportunities in the world? So I feel like they can blame white people. They can be frustrated. They can have their quarrels and say that, you know, historically they were wronged in such a deep and sad way. And I would agree with that. However, the results today of that pain from so long ago allowed you to now be in the United States. So I could make the argument that the Western Atlantic slave trade is actually one of the better things that's ever happened to African Americans today, simply because they're in America because of that. I know that sounds perhaps a little controversial or insensitive, but if you truly think about it pragmatically, it's hard to argue, in my opinion.
No, it's impossible to argue. So, you can look this up. It's just a statistical fact. In what country of the world are black people the wealthiest? Right? Like, well, surely, it's Zimbabwe, or I bet you, it's Uganda. No, like, it's the United States. The black people in the United States are the richest black people in the world. And so the point is, with slavery, it's not to say that the United States did no wrong. That's not the argument I'm making. But the argument is that every country in the world, virtually every country in the world, is responsible for slavery, but not equally responsible. Some nations had far less slaves, our nation being one of them. Some nations treated their slaves far more humanely, like ours. Many Southern slave owners, some were abusive. There's no question about that. Families, in some cases, were split up. I think that's morally reprehensible. But there were also case after case after case where the slaves were taught to speak English, even taught to read and write, invited into the churches, catechized. You have master and slave taking the Lord's Supper together as brothers in Christ. And don't forget this one, might want to hold on to this. Here's another question. If every country virtually in the world had slaves, you might want to ask the question, but which countries abolished slavery? Who did that? Right? Well, it was the Brazilians, I'm sure.
Theirs was super late in Brazil. It was I forget the date, but it was shockingly late, like maybe into the 1900s.
Right.
Yep.
So even the concept or the theory of like, well, this is just, reparations for grievances, from the past, like, no, that doesn't hold up. If you want reparations for grievances, what about all these African countries that captured your ancestors and sold you? What about all these South American countries that bought your brothers and sisters at a 5x, 10x ratio to the United States? And what about all these other countries that had to have slavery, forced to an end by predominantly white European Western countries that actually led the way in abolishing slavery. And so the point is that this is the larger context. And there was a time, I think, where propaganda was highly successful. There was a time where, like what you were saying, Dominic, I think that's insightful, where you have, your Walter Cronkite and it's, like 3 channels, on the TV, cable television, and there's kind of like a stranglehold on information. It's not like anybody anywhere can just have, do media or express their thoughts. There's only a few people who are able to do that. That's held by corporations and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, but that day is over. And so now it's the fact that like you can find this information. It's readily available, and people are becoming aware of actual history. And honestly, one day we'll probably talk about this at length, but just one other piece of the puzzle to throw in with slavery. It's like, well, who's responsible for the transatlantic slave trade? And like, who are people who are driving this industry? And all, like, well, I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around to South America buying far more slaves than we did. There's plenty of blame for, African people who actually enslaved their own people and other tribes. There's plenty of slavery in Asian nations and blame to go around there. But there's also something to be said for the Jews. You want to look at the transatlantic slave trade and look like who's behind this and who's pushing this, and like
who financed the trips because of the return that they would get on them.
Those guys always coming up.
And so that's the deal. Is like, so what's going on? Why are tensions at an all-time high? And why is there, why is everything, so political these days? And why are there so many fractures and disagreements? It's because the truth is surfacing. Like, honestly, the best way I could describe it, I've used this description before, I'll use it again, but it's very similar to the Reformation. Like it or hate it, right? So whether you're on the Catholic side of the aisle or the Protestant, when the Reformation happened, I think most Catholics even agree that at that time, it's not exactly a high watermark for the Roman Catholic Church, right? Indulgences probably weren't a good idea. There were some abuses and things that were going on. Like, it was a bad time for Roman Catholicism. And it's in that moment that a few things happen, not just that you have certain individuals like Martin Luther and Zwingli and Calvin, but in addition to that, and before Wycliffe or John Huss, but it's not just that. It's not just the reformers themselves, shining light, and revealing the truth about all the corruptions of Roman Catholicism. But it's also teamed up with unique technological innovation for the time, namely the printing press, the Gutenberg printing press. So now what you have is very similar because of the dawn of the internet and social media and podcasting and Substacks and all these things. What you had 500 years ago with the truth being unleashed, because previously corrupt elites had held things tightly and suppressed truth. Well, you have the same thing happening now. What you had happening religiously with political implications 500 years ago with Roman Catholicism and the Reformation, you now have happening largely politically and culturally, whether it be media or political elites, and who have had a stranglehold on information, and now they don't anymore. Those things are being broken up. And so as people continue to do the reading, as people continue to discover our history and things that have actually happened in the past, and then things that are currently happening now, you're going to have a lot of people who realize all of a sudden, oh, this is why I can't buy a house. Oh, this is why my children's future is screwed. Oh, this is why it's been so hard for me to get a job. And this is like, and naturally the outcome of that is you're going to have a lot of people who are angry. They're angry, and telling them, it's like after decades and decades of atrocities and wrongs and grievances, and then that side that's been, promulgating all of it gets caught. And then right then, the moment they get caught, and the other side is finally getting a little bit of justification. They say, hey, you know what? There were wrongs on both sides, and let's just let bygones be. It's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to. Now, fortunately, white Europeans historically, especially in recent history, have been the most amicable, forgiving, altruistic, charitable, generous people in the world. So you got a better chance with us, probably, in terms of, can we just forgive? And can we just move? And a lot of white people, not all, obviously, but there's a lot of white people, especially in America, who are Christians and actually love the gospel of Jesus Christ and grace that atones for sin. So you got a chance. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of people who are angry and pretending that nothing has happened, and pretending that they're just racist, or they're just wrong, or they're just doing the same Marxist stunt, being victims, but just on the other side of the equation, and it's just woke right. That's how you foment a race war. That's how you foment a serious situation. But instead, trying to diffuse tension and saying, you know what, this is wrong, and it's not fair, and politically and culturally, with those who are actually in positions of power and leadership, we're going to work to make things right, to where you have a future. To where you have a chance, to where your children have a future, where they have a chance. And we're asking you, in the meantime, to do your best to be upstanding citizens. And then pastors saying, like, to do your best to be Christians, and to forgive and to trust the gospel. And then you might have a chance. You might have a chance. But the other direction of, well, white people had their, they had their moment, their 5 minutes of fame, and now it's everybody else's turn, and we're going to continue to flood the nation with a bunch of illegals and a bunch of immigrants, and there's going to be H-1B visas, so that your son gets passed over for future employment, for some kid in India instead, and we're going to continue to sell out your country and make you a tax farm for Ukraine and for Israel, and for everybody else. And in the meantime, anyone who notices that and says a word about it, we're going to beat you over the head and call you a racist and call you woke right. I'm just guessing here, but I don't think that's going to end well. I don't think that's going to end well. Any final thoughts from you guys? Have we gone to our second commercial?
No, we still have another commercial.
Let's do our second commercial. We'll come back for final thoughts, and we'll go ahead and land the plane. Running your business with purpose means looking beyond last month's numbers to next year's vision. Kaylee Smith offers CFO-level strategy scaled just for small businesses. At Midstate Accounting, she takes care of your compliance, bookkeeping, and tax returns while providing holistic advisory and fractional CFO services to help you steward your resources with a distinctly Christian perspective. Ready to align your finances with your future? Then call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278 for a free, no-obligation consultation. Mention the Right Response podcast to get 10% off your first 3 months. Prefer to explore online? Then you can visit midstateaccounting.net to learn more or schedule a call. Again, that's midstateaccounting.net. With Midstate Accounting, you'll plan for tomorrow while operating in faith today. So call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278. Again, that's 573-889-7278. Are you a Christian struggling to find companies that align with your values and beliefs? Well, then Squirrelly Joe's has you covered for all your coffee needs. All of their coffee is hand-selected and roasted fresh every day by a family of fellow believers. Try them out and you'll savor exceptional coffee while knowing that your investment supports a company committed to following God's teachings and upholding truth and righteousness, ensuring that your hard-earned money contributes to the growth of God's kingdom. Stop giving your hard-earned dollars to pagans who support evil. Right Response listeners have access to an exclusive deal. Your first bag of coffee is free. All you have to do is cover the shipping. So head on over to squirrellyjoes.com/right response. Again, that's squirrellyjoes.com/right response to claim your first free bag of coffee today. All right, we've got a couple super chats here at the end that we want to go ahead and honor. Real quick before that, there was one question that was not a super chat. Hypnotizes Lobsters said, you, talking to me, you said you would crawl over broken glass to vote for Trump, but I know that you're against IVF. How do you reconcile that with the whims of the technocrats? Very easy. Number one, Kamala never had on the campaign trail a promise that she would not federally subsidize and fund IVF. So anything on that issue that Trump would be willing to do, I believe that she would be willing to do also. Number two, even though Trump is not deporting nearly the amount of people that he should, currently he's on track for deporting 2 million people if we're lucky. Maybe he picks up, maybe we trust the plan. Maybe he picks up the rate. But simply by stopping the flood at our southern border of immigrants, that alone, as it relates to abortion, we had, I believe it was like 9 million that were legal, another 11 million illegal that just were counted in the last 4 years under the Obama administration that came into the country, 20 million. All the getaways and all the ones that are not counted, many people, trusted guys in this area are estimating anywhere from another 10 to 20 million. 40 million is not far-fetched. 40 million in 4 years. Trump needs to deport millions. Even if he doesn't, if he simply stops the bleeding, if he simply stops at the southern border, and certainly if we had Kamala, you would have another 40 million plus. If Trump stops and we don't get 40 million more, and we know that with Kamala we would have, then as that relates to future campaigns, future elections, future votes, Democrats, Republicans, what that would lend towards, another 40 million over the course of a 4-year Kamala administration, is essentially that Republicans would never win a vote ever again. In many ways, it was, if we had lost, it was the last election. And so then what you're talking about is Kamala winning and then inviting enough immigrants who like in a landslide, it's like 80, 90% vote Democrat. And so ensuring future Democrat elections in perpetuity. And then those policies lending towards more and more abortion, even the redoing of Roe and all these different things, and federally funded IVF. So to answer the question, hypnotizes lobsters, you said that you voted for Trump. How do you reconcile that with, him being, talking about IVF and you being against IVF? Because anything that Republicans do for abortion, although I think it's atrocious and I disagree with them, a lot of them are just simply not conservative. And yes, that also includes Trump. But by comparison, it's a million times better. The alternative is that the country is done, that the country is over, that you have another 40, 50 million immigrants, and then they win the next vote because you can't win anymore. So then you have 8 more years of another Democrat who brings in another 100 million immigrants, and your country is gone. Your country is gone. Abortion then reigns supreme across the board. You will get federally funded IVF through the Democrats. That's why I voted for Trump. I was a single issue voter in many ways this last election, and the single issue being immigration, and immigration being a single issue that affects all other issues, including abortion. Do you want, Wes, we'll alternate between you and Michael, but do you want to go ahead and start handling some of the super chats?
Sure. I'll hit the top one from Covenanter. $10 super chat. Thanks, Covenanter. Howdy, love what you do. I live in Waco. This would be Waco, Texas. Is it worth it to drive to your church?
Yes.
Myself, Presbyterian, and my pregnant wife, SBC, Southern Baptist. Have no community friends also struggling with Paedo versus Credo. We have at least one family in our church, maybe a couple, that do commute from Waco. So instantly there would be people that live closer to you, you'd be able to connect with during the week. And I would say as far as Paedo versus Credo, we have a mix of both in our church. So this is not like attending a Southern Baptist church where they exclusively practice. Joel, you don't perform infant baptisms, but we have a sister church that if you had a child born and you wanted to have them baptized, we'd send you over to there and they would do that. So we accept both, and you need community. Yeah. Everything going on right now, you need community, you need friends. So please make a visit, introduce yourself to myself, to Joel, to Michael, and you are more than welcome.
Yep.
Michael, do you want to handle the next one?
This is from Michael, Super Chat 1352. From Michael, thank you very much. Statistics are not racist, but reality. Yes, demographics are destiny. And unfortunately, it is a ploy of the left to try and claim that using statistics is indeed racist. But no. Now, there is a way that we can lob statistics as a what's the joke about statistics? 93% of statistics are made up on the spot or something like that.
Right.
So my encouragement is we want to make sure we're accurate with our statistics. But for our part, we've cited Bureau of Justice, FBI, things like that, like as reputable as we can when we get into these statistics, and the numbers are what they are.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Salty Sailor, $5 super chat. Thanks, Salty Sailor. He says, like the video, you heathens. Have a great weekend, brothers. Thanks, Salty Sailor. We appreciate it. Dominique, thanks for joining us. Any final thoughts from you?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I basically just think that this sort of behavior and this sort of strange donation practice you're seeing, I think it's kind of a long time coming. I don't think it's about that people so much want to donate to this person. I'm sure many of them believe that what she did was somewhat heinous. I just think ultimately that no one is really willing to speak out for white advocacy. People are often very discouraged. They're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. They're afraid that they're going to face social pressures. So this was their outlet to kind of show, that their white guilt is on the way out and they're tired of not confronting these things. And so I think this is actually sort of an initial spark. I think you're going to see more actions like this, not necessarily what she did, just more support for people that are being racially targeted that happen to be white. So, always a pleasure talking to you guys. I really appreciate how you guys tackle sensitive issues with the very logical, pragmatic, and you're well intended, and you can tell. You're not trying to go after these subjects and make anybody feel bad. But again, you're pursuing truths, and sometimes that can be a little bit inconvenient or a little bit, hurts people's feelings a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Tell our listeners real quick where they can follow you.
Sure. So the only thing I'm really active on is X. So X, formerly Twitter. So D Michael Trippy at X. That's where you guys can find me.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and thanks to the listener for tuning in. We hope that this episode has been helpful for you. And Lord willing, we will see you guys again next week.